Did you know that setting up your classroom intentionally can actually prevent up to 90% of your teacher problems? Let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Helena, the creator and founder of The Present Teacher and author of That New Teacher Next Door. And welcome to this week's content where we're talking about how to plan your classroom intentionally to prevent a lot of teacher problems in the future. So let's dive in. So, when I was a first year teacher, I spent my entire summer decorating my classroom. I had a travel themed classroom because I was ESL endorsed and we were a bilingual school. And while fun, the first few days, the last few days of summer, I spent scrambling on what I was going to teach because I spent the entire summer looking at themes, looking at organization hacks, coming up with cute bundles, and deciding whether or not I wanted to spend the money on those bundles and instead create my own. And I was just so excited to have my own classroom and set up this theme that's what I spent my summer doing. But then the last few days, like I said, I was frazzled and chaotic. The first week of school was a frazzled and chaotic week. Behaviors were at an all time high. I had no idea how to teach in a way that would get my students to listen to me that first few weeks of school, let alone help me run the classroom like I do now by the end of the month. And we're going to talk about why. So, with that being said, let's dive in. Let's talk about the mistake I commonly see teachers make when it comes to setting up their classroom. And a lot of it's going to sound familiar from my story that I shared at the beginning. So, teachers set up decor first, they save other things last. They spend their time scrolling social media for ideas, they look at decor ideas. Organization hacks. They watch setup vlogs, which believe me, I love binging those too, but they're not actually focusing on the other things that are going to help them set up their classroom and go in with a plan. So this can look like classroom management. They have no idea how they're going to run their classroom, let alone what are they going to teach those first few weeks of school to get their kids to listen to them. They don't really think about their classroom layout. They might think, "Oh, the pencil sharpener might look great there, the extra notebooks there, the extra books there, turn and basket over there," but they're not thinking about the flow. And when you think about the flow of your classroom, you're actually minimizing the amount of behavior because you're thinking of areas that work well together and avoiding areas that don't. And you're setting up areas intentionally to minimize distractions versus just putting stuff randomly around your classroom and then constantly asking your kids to sit down because they're constantly out of their seat. They're not focusing on what to teach. What should I be teaching those first 2 weeks of school? Instead, like I said, they're focused on decor and making their classroom look cute. So, what this does is teachers spend their entire summer decorating and then the last week of school for everything else. And that makes up for a very chaotic first week of school. They don't have systems in place. They have high disruptive behaviors. They have no idea how to get their students to listen. And they're scrambling to plan the day of or the day before. And they feel behind before the school year even starts. And then they think, wait a second, I just spent my entire summer working. Why do I feel behind already? And it's because they were focusing on the wrong things. Resources are cluttered. Their papers are everywhere. Their file basket is overfilled and there's papers all over their desk and they are just looking through the download section and the recently purchased section of TPT trying to find the resources only to buy that resource again or a different version of that resource again and then find it again later. And then constantly have to remind students to stop talking or being disruptive because, again, they didn't take the flow into mind. So, now that we talked about this, let's talk about what intentional design means in a classroom setting. Designing your classroom with flow in mind. So you're thinking about traffic. When students walk through the classroom, what does their day look like? Where are ways that I can minimize disruptive behavior? And what are areas I can set up? Put resources together so they're not sporadic around the classroom so students aren't constantly getting up going every which way in the classroom for resources. Keeps behaviors down. You already know how you're going to teach students to listen to you and follow expectations in class. You already have paper resources organized. You have the flow of your paper resources in mind. You already know what's going to happen from the moment you print something all the way to when you file it later, and you have a process. So you're not just printing something, making a million copies, putting them sporadically throughout your classroom, and then putting it in a to file basket to then leave it there until the end of the school year to then sit there for hours filing your resources away, or worse, just throwing it away and starting over the next year. You have the flow of your digital resources in mind. Not just keeping in the download section, but once you find a resource, where are you putting it so you can find it next year to make it easier? And then organization. How are you organizing all your resources, all your supplies, your whole classroom, each specific area, so it's easy to find things and it's minimizing the amount of time you have to spend looking for things, the amount of time you have to tell students to sit down, the amount of time students spend during transitions grabbing materials. So intentional design is sitting down and thinking about all of these things first before you set up your classroom. It cuts setup time in half, and I would argue almost a quarter the amount of time because you're going in with a plan. You're not getting the keys to your classroom, feeling excited to set up your classroom and thinking and freezing, oh, wait, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea what to focus on. You have a plan, you know what you're doing, you know what goes in each area, and you know where each area is and why. So you go in, relax, set up each area knowing exactly how you're going to go about doing that. And then you go in and decorate. Again, a primary girly. I love themes. I love decor. I love it all. It's one of my favorite things to do. But cutting setup time in half by planning first, then decorating is going to completely change the game when it comes to setting up your classroom. So let's talk about why design intentionally first. So it prevents disruptive behavior from occurring because you thought of areas that coexist together instead of clashing. You know that the library area should be by this area and this area should be by this area because they work well together, but to avoid this area by this area. It cuts transition times in half because the flow is accounted for. I know that at the beginning of the day, students go here to here, so I'm going to make sure my flow of my classroom matches that. It makes planning and gathering resources take a fraction of the time because you have your digital and paper organization in place. You know where your resources are, you can pull them up, and you have them saved for next year, so it cuts your planning time in half. And it cuts setup time in half, if not a quarter, because you have a plan. You're no longer going into your classroom saying, now what? So now that we talked about this, let's talk about what the poolside teacher does differently. They're not spending their entire summer setting up for their classroom. They know that design and systems first, setup and decor second. They're designing her classroom first on a sketch pad at a coffee shop. When they get inspired thinking, oh, wait, I really want to put this in this corner, and here's why, when they're talking to a friend, when they're watching a movie, when they're going on a walk, when they're taking a nap in the middle of the day, when they're vegging out on the couch for the second week in a row. That is what they're doing. And then they go in and actually enjoy the setup and decor process because they already have a plan. They already know what they're doing. They get to sip their coffee and listen to a vibey music and a podcast, knowing they know exactly what goes where and why, and that she's ready for the school year to begin. She values her time and she knows she doesn't need to spend all summer setting up. She can do it in one single vibey weekend. So, to wrap things up, when you set up your classroom intentionally, it eliminates about 90% of your teacher problems because you've created flow and you intentionally designed your classroom to account for all those problems that might occur. Here's a quick recap of what we talked about. The first thing we talked about is the mistake I often see teachers make, including myself when it comes to classroom setup. We talked about what intentional design means. We talked about why designing intentionally first matters. And then we talked about what the poolside teacher does differently. She is out enjoying her life, sitting down, designing her classroom from a sketchpad or a notebook or a journal, and then she's going in with a plan, enjoying the setup process. Instead of spending weeks in her classroom trying to set up and figure things out, she has a plan in place so she can enjoy her summer and set it up at the same time, not setting up your classroom to enjoy her summer. If you found these tips helpful, I would really appreciate if you could like, subscribe, leave a review wherever you're tuning in from, so more content like this can reach more teachers who need to hear it. If you want to take it a step further and you want the first 10 steps you should be taking when it comes to setting up your classroom, make sure to check out my free classroom setup guide. It has, like I said, the first 10 steps to setting up your classroom for success over the school year in a relaxed state, not an overwhelmed state. The second thing, if you want to see which templates I'm using to set up my classroom and what other teachers are using to set up their classroom, things like classroom procedures, super improver walls, back to school night, all of these things to set up your classroom and set up those systems in place, make sure to check out my classroom setup bundle. It has all of the templates I just mentioned plus more. My favorite are the classroom procedure slides. What I did is I took the most commonly taught classroom procedures that teachers teach in the first month and I did them for you. I made them all for you and they're editable. So if you don't like what I put and you do something different, you can go and tweak those procedures. But now when you go to teach a procedure that day, you just pull up the slide, teach it, and then put it away. And then whenever you need to review it later in the year, it's done for you. So make sure to go check that out. If you want a step-by-step process to setting up your classroom in a flowy state with intentional design in mind, make sure to check out my 14-day poolside teacher experience. What I'm excited about is over the course of 14 days, I'm going to walk you through 4 phases. The design phase, the intentional design phase that we're talking about. How do you create a classroom with flow in mind so you can go in and set things up knowing exactly where and why, and then you can actually enjoy the process. Step number 2, how are you going to get students to listen to you and help you run the classroom by the end of those first couple months in school? Step number 3, how are you organizing your digital and physical resources to cut planning time in half throughout the rest of the year? Step number 4, what are you planning and how are you planning those first 2 weeks of school? So when you walk in those first days of school, you're not worried or frantically planning last minute. You have a plan and you can actually start planning the third, fourth week of school and not have to worry about starting feeling behind. So if you want to join us, what I love about this, and I'm doing something crazy. I'm doing the 14-day experience for $14. Yes, $1 a day for this 14-day experience. We're starting July 15th. So if you would like to join us setting up your classroom from a flowy poolside teacher state, make sure to go check that out. We would love to have you join us. As always, remember we are stronger together, and I'll see you in the next one, Teacher Bestie. Bye.